Shalom, and welcome back to another lecture on the book of Samuel as we continue to journey through the Bible. And we're learning the last chapters, or 25th and 26th chapters of the book of Samuel, first book of Samuel. There are two books. And we are discussing David. King David, well, he's the king who is on the run. Okay, and King David is running away from Saul, and as a result, he's running throughout the heartland. If we look at this map before us, we see that the yellow represents the rocky highlands, the Judea and Samaria, or the Judean hills. North of that would be the Samarian hills. And we can see that if we look to the right, that's going to the east towards the Jordan River. And if we look to the left, it's going to the west towards the Mediterranean Sea. You can see down in the right corner the red square of where we are. And you see how if to the left we go to the sea. And that's why if we look in our map, the upper left corner, we see the word Gat, which is one of the Philistine cities that actually takes our stories lead us to, because David runs to the Philistines as well. In our story, in this chapter, we're going to be, where the pin drop is, we're going to be discussing something that takes place in a city of Maon, near another village called Carmel. And this is just below Hebron, the hills of Hebron. And it is a story where David is continuing to run and seeks shelter. And remember, when you're on the run, you don't really have resources. You don't have flock, so you don't have food. You have to and he has a bit of a small army of 600 people, and he has to find them food. And it is a difficult existence, and one which relies on the good wills of the people around him. And that's the confrontation that takes place in this week's chapter. We begin with a strange sentence, which says that Samuel died. And all of Israel gathered to eulogize him and bury him in his hometown of Ramah. And as a result, or it seems like right next to it, David goes down to Midbar Paran, where we just mentioned where we're going to go to, this place called Maon. What's the relationship between Samuel dying and the rest of our story? The Navi doesn't tell us. It seems like it's a separate history that Samuel died. Some of the commentaries explain that David wanted to be close to Samuel, and when he died, he ran south, he ran far away, because he realized that there was no need for him to be in that area anymore. That's one possibility, although we have no proof. Another commentary, a midrash, says that what David's about to do is not necessarily the best behavior, and that is the Navi is telling us, Samuel, his mentor, is dead, but if he were alive, he would not necessarily be happy with what David was going to do. What does he end up doing? So first it tells us a little bit, little story. There was a man in a place called Maon who had a lot of wealth and a lot of fields and a lot of possessions in the neighboring town of Carmel. He was very wealthy. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And the time had come to shear the sheep. Now, in ancient times, the time of shearing the sheep was a festival, because it is like when you collect your crops, you realize how much you have, and it's time to celebrate. And the same thing with the sheep shearing is you can sell the wool, and you can, realize how much money you have. Tells us another piece of information, verse 3. The man's name was Naval. We'll learn what that means. And his wife's name is Abigail. And the wife was very smart and very beautiful. And the man was very harsh and did evil. And he was from the descendants of Kalev. Some comment that he may have been from dogs, which means like it's already starting to insult him because he was such a terrible man. Okay. David, verse 4, David hears that Naval is going to have this ceremony of the shearing of the sheep. He sends 10 of his men to go to the Carmel and go to Naval and say hello in my name. And say to Naval, long life, you should have peace, your family should have peace, and everything about you should have peace. And this sounds very nice, very friendly, very willing of David. And it sounds like he's offering, remember, he's kind of like a bit of a renegade, and he's got his own group of warriors, but he wants to, extend a branch of peace. And then he says, by the way, I hear now that you are shearing. In other words, you're having a celebration because you have all your sheep. And then he says, you should know we did not harm them, and nothing of theirs was missing all the time they were in Carmel. We, were in the Carmel, and we didn't hurt any of your sheep. Therefore, it sounds like, verse 8, if you perhaps have something that you could share with us during your festive occasion, that would be very nice. Right? You wonder, what exactly is this request? On the one hand, it sounds like he's from the mafia, we protected your sheep from ourselves. So we are telling you that you should pay us off for it. On the other hand, it's possible to say, now that's a negative way of looking at David. A positive way of looking at it is that he actually did guard the sheep. Remember, there are wolves and there are bandits and there are people who are, who are running after the animals. And David is telling Naval that I want you to know we protected you. And therefore, now maybe you'll say it wasn't, an actual contract, but if you would like to give us a tip, say for our activities, we would appreciate it. After all, we're starving. Okay? Unfortunately, Naval's response, not very nice. Naval answered David's servants, who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many slaves nowadays who run away from their master. Now, these were harsh words. Why were these harsh words? Everybody in Israel at the time knew who David was. After all, Shaul ba'alafav v'David b'rivotav. Saul slew by the thousands, but David by the tens of thousands. And David slew Goliath. Therefore, there was not a house that was not familiar with David. Not only that, it is possible, and here it's an important consideration, it is possible that people already knew that David was king. Rumors were abounding. Jonathan knew, Saul knew, people in the court might have known, in which case it's not just that Naval was speaking harshly to some guy named David who was a warrior and maybe, a bandit, I don't know. But he also might have been speaking harshly to a king of Israel. Now, what's your punishment for speaking harshly and insulting and being rude to a random person? The answer is, I don't know, maybe they'll be mean to you. Maybe they'll smack you, beat you up a little bit. What's your punishment for insulting a king? Well, you could argue that it's the death penalty. This is one of the arguments to give an excuse for David's actions that we're going to witness as we read. David's verse 12. Verse 13. When David found out what he said, "Everybody put on your belts with your swords." 400 men followed him, and they were about to go to war. You can imagine that it was going to be a massacre. After all, Nabal didn't necessarily have an army, and David took 400 men with him. One of Nabal's young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, and he told him what happened. And he explained to Abigail that we were good to Nabal and his cattle the whole time, and the sheep, and we protected and we guarded. And David was then spurned by Nabal. So I want you to know, he says to Nabal's wife, that this is what's going to happen in the very near future. David is getting ready to go to battle. So he says, consider carefully what you should do, because you're about to witness great bloodshed if you don't act fast. Abigail understood. She quickly got together 200 loaves of bread without telling her husband, 2 jars of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 sons of parched corn, 100 cakes of raisin, 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on the donkeys. She told her men, go ahead of me and I'll follow you. And she didn't tell her husband about. She is preventing, a mass bloodshed right now. As she's coming forward, in verse 20, she meets David, who's coming, on his way to kill Nabal. David was saying, it was all for nothing that I protected that fellow's possessions in the wilderness, and that nothing he owned is missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God do thus and more to the enemies of David, if by the light of morning I leave a single male of his. This is one translation. There are other translations that basically are less flattering in terms of what David said he was going to leave. But basically, he was saying, it's about to happen in the next few hours. Abigail, got wind of this, and she jumps off of her, camel maybe, and she falls on her face, on the floor, on the ground. And she says, please, my master, the blame is all mine. The sin is mine. Listen to the words of your servant. Please pay no attention to that wretched fellow Nabal, for his name is just what he is. What does Nabal mean? It means a boor. It means a person who withers things away. It means a nevela is like a thing that that is left in the dirt. So his name is Nabal. His name is that he's a treacherous person. And she says, I, your handmaid, didn't see the young men whom my Lord sent. In other words, I didn't catch them earlier. I swear, as the Lord lives and as you lives, the Lord has kept you from seeking revenge. Let your enemies and all who would harm my Lord fare like Nabal, which means she gives him a blessing. And she says that, take all this, and I am on your side. And I will give you a blessing that you should be victorious in all of your efforts. And please take my confession or my sin. and I will assure you that God will assure you that you'll never have any pain in the future. And then she says in verse 29, and if anyone sets out to pursue you and seek your life will be bound in the bond of eternal life with the Lord, which is an interesting phrase, Yitzor B'tzor HaChaim, which is a phrase we say when someone passes away, that God will always protect you. And then she says in verse 30, somewhat of a prescient statement, and when the Lord accomplished for all the good he promised you, he has appointed you ruler of Israel. So you see that either she was saying that she knew he was, or she was wishing that he would become. Either way, she's trying to fend off David from basically killing Naval and everyone there. David is taken to her and responds kindly, verse 32, Vayomer David l'Abigail, and he said, blessed is God, King of Israel, or Lord of Israel, who sent you to me. Blessed is your prudence, and blessed yourself. Blessed are you for restraining me for taking revenge on Naval. For as sure as God of Israel knows, is my witness, he was about to become, mincemeat. I was going to destroy him and everyone around him for what he said to me and what he's done. David took all the wine and all the food from her hands, and he said to her, Ali l'shalom leveitech, I listened to you, I accepted your position. Go in peace to your home. So it's a fascinating story because we have here, this, instead of a damsel in distress, we have the heroine who saves, she actually saves two people, okay? She saves Naval and she saves David. I mean, David was going to go and kill for not the best reason possible. He was just so angry that he was talked to in such a way. But this isn't any random person. This is David Melech Yisrael. This is the great King David, and spiritual King David. We didn't think he was going to go and let his anger take control of him. So she goes and fends off that anger in a very smart way and very respectful way, and she saves her husband's life, whom she obviously despises. And she saves David from entering into a pretty terrible thing. In the morning, she goes home, and Naval was having a major party, and he was drunk to no end. And in the morning, she did tell him everything that took place, and his heart dropped. It says in Hebrew, "Vayamat libo b'kirbo v'huaya le'evan." Maybe because he realized that he was about to be killed. And he was so frightened. And look, verse 38, 10 days later, God struck Naval and he died. It's interesting, what a brilliant woman, this Abigail. She knew at the right time how to speak to David, and she knew at the right time how to speak and to strike fear into the heart of Naval. God struck him down, but certainly she did a job putting him in his place. Verse 39, when David hears that Naval died, he said, "Blessed God who fought my battle," from Naval. And he asked to take Abigail as his wife. And his servants said to, Abigail, would you like to become David's wife? And she bowed down and she said, absolutely, yes. And she went with her and her five maidservants. And she followed David and became his wife, together with Achinoam from Yisrael, and both of them were his wives, because Shaul had given Michal, David's wife, to Paltit ben Laish from Galilee. So we see a strange story that David kind of loses his cool. Not something that we would expect based on our understanding of who we want or who we expect David to be, even in the midst of his downtrodden existence with running away from Saul and suffering and not having food. But to take someone's life simply for such a thing, which is why the rabbis say that David convened a beit in a court, and he said, we condemn him to death because he spoke against the kingship. Nevertheless, this chapter certainly teaches us about the greatness of Abigail as one of the great biblical personalities. Now, David is in Ma'on. Let's go back to our map. David is in Ma'on and the Carmel. And what's immediately north of Ma'on? A place called Ziph. Ziph is another city. And they get wind of David and his success in marrying, and I guess he became the owner of the farms there. And so what do? The people of Ziph? Chapter 26. They came to Saul and they said, David is hiding in the fields in the hill of Chachila. And Shaul, who, if we remember chapter just before, Shaul made up with David. He said, you're my son. No longer. He takes 3,000 soldiers with him to run after David in the desert of Ziph, in the Ziph wilderness. But, a huge 3,000-man army, it needs provisions and needs a camp and has, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of people and a lot of things going on there. And David, on the other hand, knows the terrain, and he got wind of exactly where Saul would be was resting, was sleeping that night. So in verse 4, he sends spies, and he found out exactly where the king's tent is. And verse 5, he goes to the place where the king was sleeping. Now, the king had a great fighter, the head of his army, called Avner ben Ner. Very powerful, very, very strong, very important. And he was sleeping right next to Saul. But nevertheless, both of them were sleeping there in the middle of the night. And David somehow managed to get very, very close to them. Now, David says to some of his men that were with him, Achimelech from Hittite, he was not Jewish, Avishai, the son of Tzuriah, who's going to come with me to Shaul? It was a dangerous kind of thing to do, but Avishai said, I'm going to come with you. So David and Avishai go in the middle of the night, and they find Shaul lying next to his sword. And Avner is surrounding him, but they're all sleeping. So Avishai says to David, God has given us our enemy in our hands tonight. We can go. Let me go, and I'll kill him with this sword, and he'll never come back, and that'll be the end of it. And David, just as he was impetuous to almost kill Naval in the previous chapter, he is reserved and respectful, once again, to Saul in this chapter. And he says in verse 9, don't do him any violence. No one can lay hands on the Lord's anointed with impunity. He says, as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him down, or his time will come and he'll die, or he'll go to battle and perish. But God forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Just take the spear and the water jar and let's be off. Clearly, this reminds us of the story in which David confronts Saul when he's going to the bathroom in the cave. once again, David wants to show Saul that he could have destroyed him. He does something instead, which is very embarrassing. He takes his sword. You can imagine what King Saul's first in command of, Abner ben Ner felt when the king's sword was stolen. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 12, he takes the sword and he stands, he goes all the way in the morning to the other side, like a mountain range nearby, and he calls out to the people and to Abner ben Ner. So he's calling out, and Abner says, "Who are you? How dare you call to the king?" And David says to Abner, "Hello, Ishata. Aren't you the great Abner? And there was no one greater than you in Israel. Why then didn't you guard the king like you should have? Not good what you did, because you deserve to die if you let someone come in the middle of the night and take the king's sword." He shows him the sword, and Shaul hears and recognizes the voice of David. And all of a sudden, the old Shaul comes back. This is constant going on, like this kind of manic depression type thing that he gets, or split personality, whatever you call it. But, a few days ago, he was ready, filled with anger and zeal to go and kill David. And now when he hears David's voice, his heart melts. And he calls out, "David, is that you, my son? Is that you?" And David says, why are you running after me? What have I done?" He's still trying to use logic to find a way to get through to Saul, but it just doesn't work. And David says, "If the Lord has incited you against me, let him be appeased by an offering, and if his men, may they be accursed, and for they have driven me out today. Tell me, what have I done that I deserve to be chased after all this time? For the king of Israel has come out to sing a single fleet. Like, why do you have 3,000 people coming to look for me? I just don't understand." Saul melts again. He says, "Chatati, I sinned. Again, my son. I will not hurt you any further. You are so special to me. You are so beloved. And I'm terribly, terribly sorry I acted in such a way." Of course, David's heard this song before. And David says, "Here, my king, here is your sword." And one of the young men, the soldiers, takes it. "And let God return you to your righteousness and your truth and your honor. And I want you just to know that I would never, ever violate the Holy One, the Anointed One. You are still the Anointed One, and that carries great weight." And he concludes saying, "Just as I valued your life highly this day, so may the Lord value your life, and may he rescue me from all trouble." And Saul answered, "Baruch atah b'ni David, blessed are you, David. So it shall be done. You may go." And David went on his way, and Shaul returned home. At some point, and this is the beginning of the next chapter, David realizes, okay, I got lucky. I was one step ahead of him. I figured out where he was. But, if he's going to come with 3,000 men with me again tomorrow, I can't keep doing this. So David at this point is depressed because he understands that Saul is beyond reproach. He's beyond reason. He's not able to be influenced any longer. And therefore, he is basically, he's gone from David's mind. In other words, he's not able to be convinced. So David does the craziest thing, which is he goes to the Philistines, the immortal enemies of David and of Saul and all of Israel. And he says, I'm going to go to spend time with them. In other words, I'm going to go over there because I'm not safe anywhere in Israel. The only place, ironically, I am safe is in the house of the enemy of Israel. And he goes to the Philistines, and that we'll learn about next class. I wish you all a good night.